Get out!
Revenge Files with Nora.
File 17, Michelle. 19 people watched him say it. 19 colleagues, clients, and senior partners in that conference room on the 34th floor, and not one of them spoke up. Michelle doesn't have the presence for leadership. She's competent, sure, but she's too quiet, too reserved. Clients need someone who commands a room. The managing partner didn't even look at me when he said it. He was talking to the client, explaining why someone else would be taking over the account I'd built from nothing over 7 years. 7 years of early mornings and late nights. 7 years of solving problems no one else could solve. 7 years of being the person they called when everything was falling apart. And in 30 seconds, he erased all of it. The client nodded along, already forgetting I existed. The partner who would replace me smiled like he'd won something, and I sat there, silent, because that's what quiet people do, right? But here's what none of them understood. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes silence is just patience. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes it's the space where transformation begins. Within 6 months, I would build a team that outperformed every division in their firm. Within a year, I would recruit away their 3 biggest clients. And within 18 months, the managing partner who dismissed me would be explaining to his board why his revenue had dropped by 40%. They said I was too quiet to lead. They were wrong. Here's what happened. I started at Whitfield Partners straight out of business school. Murray Hill office, 34th floor, with a view of the Chrysler building that I never had time to appreciate because I was always working. The firm specialized in strategic consulting for pharmaceutical companies, complex regulatory work, market entry strategies, pricing models that could make or break a drug launch. It wasn't glamorous, but it was intricate, and I was good at it. From my first week, I noticed something about the culture. The loudest voices got the most attention. Partners who dominated meetings, who interrupted constantly, who filled every silence with their own opinions, they were the ones who advanced. The ones who listened, who processed, who chose their words carefully, we were invisible. Take me for example. I was invisible. But here's what they couldn't make sense of. I was also effective. Within 3 years, I had developed a reputation as the person who could untangle impossible problems. When a client's FD, a submission was rejected for the 3rd time, they called me. When a pricing strategy collapsed 2 weeks before launch, they called me. When no one else knew what to do, they called Michelle. Just not for anything visible, but not for anything visible to them. My manager at the time, a senior consultant named Kevin Sato, once pulled me aside after a particularly successful project. The client had sent a glowing email praising my analysis, and I'd assumed naively that it might lead to recognition. "Michelle, you need to speak up more in meetings," he said. "People don't know what you contribute." "The client knows," I replied. "The client isn't going to promote you." He was right about that. The promotion cycles came and went. Consultants who started after me moved ahead. Not because their work was better, I reviewed enough of it to know the difference, but because they performed confidence in ways I didn't know how to fake. I watched colleagues present my ideas as their own. I watched junior analysts get credit for analyses I'd built. I watched the game being played, and I refused to play it. That was my choice. I own that. What I didn't expect was how much it would cost me. By year 5, I had built Whitfield's entire pharmaceutical practice into something substantial. 12 major clients, $32 million in annual revenue, a methodology that other firms were trying to copy. And still, when the leadership team discussed the practice's future, they discussed it without me in the room. The managing partner, Gerald Hoffman, was the kind of leader who believed his own mythology. He'd built Whitfield from a 3-person shop into a mid-sized powerhouse, and he never let anyone forget it. Every meeting included at least one reference to when I started this firm or what I learned building this company. He was 63 years old, perpetually tan, and absolutely certain that leadership required a specific kind of presence. I met with him once a year for my performance review. Every year, the same conversation. "Michelle, your work is exceptional. The clients love you, but you need to be more visible, more assertive. I've been saying this for years now, and nothing changes." He wasn't wrong that nothing changed, he was wrong about why. He thought I hadn't tried, but that wasn't true. I'd tried in my own way, public speaking courses, executive presence coaching, forcing myself to volunteer for presentations. None of it worked because none of it was me. Do you know that feeling? Being surrounded by people who expect you to be ashamed of who you are and change it. It puts constant pressure on you, and you can't even remember who you really are anymore. Finally, I saw and accepted this clearly. The problem wasn't my presence. The problem was their definition of leadership, and they were rigidly attached to it. The client presentation meeting that changed everything happened on a Tuesday in March. The client was Vantage Pharmaceuticals, one of our biggest accounts. They were preparing to launch a new oncology drug, and they needed a comprehensive market entry strategy. I'd been working on it for 4 months, 80-hour weeks, endless data analysis, a 200-page strategy document that was some of the best work I'd ever done. Gerald had called a meeting to present our recommendations. 19 people in the room, Vantage's executive team, our senior partners, and a handful of consultants who would support the implementation. I should have known something was wrong when I saw the seating arrangement. Gerald sat at the head of the table, flanked by Brandon Holt, a senior consultant who'd been with the firm for 3 years and had never worked a single day on the Vantage account. Across from them, the Vantage team arranged themselves by rank, their CEO at the center, followed by executives I'd been working with for months. I was seated at the far end, near the door, next to the junior analyst who was there to manage the projector. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Gerald began by recognizing the team's dedication, then gestured vaguely in my direction. I nodded, already knowing what was coming. Brandon has been leading this effort, and I'm confident you'll be impressed with what we've developed. I froze. I tried to understand what was happening. Then Brandon smiled. The client smiled back, and something cold settled in my chest. The presentation that followed was professional and flawless. Here was the problem. The presentation was entirely built on my work. Every slide, every data point, every strategic insight, I recognized them all. Brandon delivered it smoothly, pausing for effect in the places I would have paused, emphasizing the points I'd identified as critical. He didn't stumble once. Why would he? All he had to do was memorize what I'd created over 4 months, that's it. The Vantage CEO nodded along, occasionally glancing at Gerald with approval. "This is impressive work," he said midway through. "Very thorough. We take thoroughness seriously." Gerald replied, "Brandon has built an exceptional methodology here." I sat at the end of the table, silent, watching my career evaporate in real time. That meeting was my moment, the moment I understood that merit matters less than perception. When Brandon finished, the Vantage CEO turned to Gerald. "Who's going to lead the implementation?" "Brandon will be your primary contact," Gerald said without hesitation. "He understands your business deeply." "What about the woman at the end of the table? I've worked with her before." Here's where I was the woman sitting at the table. A brief pause. Gerald glanced at me, then back to the client. "Michelle is excellent at the analytical work, but for a launch of this magnitude, you need someone who can command a room, someone with leadership presence." He said it so that I could hear it, in fact, so that I would hear it. He said it casually, like he was explaining weather patterns, as if it were obvious. 19 people in that room, not one of them challenged him. The Vantage CEO nodded slowly. "If you think that's best." "I do." And that was it. 7 years of building, 4 months of work, and a future I'd assumed was mine, all handed to someone else because I was too quiet. I could have spoken up, corrected the record, claimed my work, but I wasn't that person. So I sat there, silent, while my professional life burned down around me. The meeting ended with handshakes and scheduling discussions I wasn't included in. Brandon collected the materials, my materials, and followed the clients out, already establishing the relationship he would build on my foundation. Gerald stopped by my chair on his way out. "Good work supporting this effort, Michelle. The analysis was solid." Supporting. That was the word he chose. "We should discuss your development plan soon," he added. "I think there are some workshops on executive presence that might help." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in a conference room that suddenly felt very small. The woman at the table. I stayed there for 20 minutes after everyone left. Yes, just sat, staring at the empty chairs, trying to understand what had happened and what I was going to do about it. The junior analyst poked his head back in. "Miss Whitmore, should I turn off the projector?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, I thought your work was incredible. I've been learning a lot just from reviewing your files." I looked at him for the first time, young, earnest. He didn't know yet how the game was played. "What's your name?" I asked. Daniel Reyes." "Daniel, let me give you some advice. If you want to exist in this business, document everything. Every contribution, every email, every meeting where you speak. Build a record that no one can erase." He nodded, confused but attentive. "Okay, can I ask why?" "Because someday, someone will try to take credit for what you've built to destroy you, and when that happens, you'll want proof." It was the first time I'd spoken that truth out loud, and saying it changed something in me. I wasn't just going to accept this. I wasn't going to attend workshops on presence and pray for a different outcome. I wasn't going to keep playing a game designed to make me lose. I was going to build something new. The next 3 weeks were some of the hardest of my career. I kept showing up to work. I kept completing my assignments. I kept being exactly who they expected me to be: quiet, competent, invisible. But underneath that surface, something was shifting, or what had already changed was surfacing. I started paying attention differently, not to the work, but to the patterns. Because what I hadn't figured out yet wasn't the work itself, it was these patterns. Patterns connected to their definition of leadership in their heads. Who got promoted and why? Who left and where they went? Which clients stayed loyal to individuals rather than firms? Which skills were not just visible but actually valuable? And whether they were given the value they deserved. The pharmaceutical consulting world wasn't that large. Reputations traveled. I decided I wanted to understand the issue on a broader scale. This couldn't be a problem only I was experiencing. I began reaching out to former colleagues, quiet conversations over coffee, careful questions about opportunities, nothing aggressive, nothing that would trigger alarm, just a woman exploring her options. What I learned surprised and pleased me. My reputation was better than I'd realized. Clients remembered me even when my firm forgot. Competitors had noticed my work even when my partners hadn't. The quiet competence that made me invisible internally had made me valuable externally. And then, a single conversation changed everything. Catherine Wells was the head of life sciences at Calloway Associates, one of our primary competitors. She'd been trying to build their pharmaceutical practice for years, and she'd watched Whitfield dominate the space with a mixture of frustration and respect. "I've followed your work for a long time," she said, cutting straight to business. "The Vantage methodology, the pricing frameworks for biologics, the regulatory strategy you developed for complex generics, it's been the foundation of Whitfield's pharmaceutical success." I nodded, surprised by how much she knew. "What I don't understand," she continued, "is why you're still a senior manager. With your track record, you should be running that practice. I'm told I lack executive presence." She laughed, a sharp, knowing sound. "Let me guess. Gerald Hoffman? You know him?" "I know his type. Confuses volume with value, thinks leadership means dominating every conversation." She leaned forward. "Michelle, I'm going to be direct. I want to build something at Calloway that doesn't exist yet, a pharmaceutical practice that actually functions, and I want you to lead it. It's clear they haven't given you the value you deserve." The offer hung in the air between us. Everything I'd wanted for 7 years, handed to me by a stranger who'd seen what my own firm couldn't. "Why me?" I asked. "There are plenty of consultants with more visibility." "Apparently Gerald's repetitive phrases have gotten to you too. I'm making this offer to you, not someone else, because visibility is overrated. Results aren't. You have a track record of solving impossible problems and building loyal client relationships. That's what I need." Hearing these words felt so good. Still, I couldn't believe it. "What's the title?" "Practice Director. Full P&L responsibility, team of your choosing, and a compensation package that reflects your actual value, not what Whitfield thinks they can get away with paying you." The old Michelle would have deflected, asked for time, retreated into analysis, but I wasn't the old Michelle anymore. I could now see that I needed to move quickly. I have conditions, I said. Name them. I want autonomy over hiring and a clear path to partner within 2 years, based on performance, not politics. Done. If you deliver, you'll earn it. What else? I want to prove something, not just to myself, to everyone who said I couldn't lead. I want to build the best pharmaceutical practice in the industry, and I want to do it my way. Catherine smiled. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. We shook hands across the table. No cameras, no witnesses, no dramatic announcement, just 2 women making a deal that would change both our futures. The hardest part wasn't leaving, it was the transition. I spent 4 more weeks at Whitfield, wrapping up projects and documenting processes, standard professional courtesy. But during that time, I was also doing something else entirely. I was reaching out to clients, not to poach them, that would be unethical, but relationships are personal, and they asked questions. And when they asked, I answered honestly. Wouldn't you have done the same? I'm joining Calloway. I'll be building their pharmaceutical practice. Will you be able to work with us there? That depends on what you need and whether Calloway can provide it, but I'd welcome the conversation. Professional, appropriate, and devastating to Whitfield if enough clients decided to have those conversations. Gerald called me into his office on my last day. I hear you're going to Calloway, he said, not offering a seat. Yes, as practice director. That's right. He leaned back, studying me with something that might have been curiosity or contempt. Something positive definitely wasn't coming. He was testing my patience. Still, I listened. You know they're setting you up to fail, right? They've tried to build a pharma practice 3 times. It never works. Maybe they needed different leadership. Maybe you're not as valuable as you think you are. That's how ruthless Gerald was. I'd rehearsed responses to this moment, just to give him what he deserved. Clever comebacks, dignified silences, professional platitudes. I was amazed at how I had ended up here all this time. How could I have worked with this man who made me feel worthless, rejected my potential, and belittled me for 7 years? Then I realized that I was the one who thought I deserved this. I didn't want to waste any more time on all this nonsense. Maybe, I said. We'll find out. Then I turned and walked out of his office, out of the building, out of the career I'd built at a place that never wanted me. I felt so much lighter. I was walking toward my new beginning. The transformation had begun. Calloway's pharmaceutical practice didn't exist when I arrived. I had an office, a title, a budget, and nothing else. Most people would have seen that as a disadvantage. I saw it as freedom. No Gerald Hoffman telling me I lacked presence, as potential. The first thing I did was hire Daniel Reyes. He'd reached out 2 weeks after I left Whitfield, asking if there might be a place for him at Calloway. The answer was yes, not because he owed me anything, but because I'd seen something in him that Whitfield would never develop, a genuine curiosity about the work itself, not just the politics around it. Daniel became my first team member, and in many ways, the foundation of everything that followed. Together, we began building. The approach I developed was different from anything the industry had seen. Most consulting firms operated on a star system, brilliant individuals who swooped in, dazzled clients, and moved on to the next engagement. It was efficient for the firm, but it left clients dependent on specific people rather than sustainable processes. I wanted to build something different. A team where knowledge was shared, where methodologies were documented, where any member could step into any role without the client noticing a difference. Not because individuals didn't matter, but because reliability mattered more. We set up everything in Asana, every project, every client deliverable, every team responsibility tracked in one central system. Nothing fell through the cracks. Nothing depended on one person's memory. Every handoff was seamless. It was, in its way, a quiet revolution. The first client came through Catherine's network, a mid-sized biotech company preparing for their first commercial launch. Low stakes by industry standards, but perfect for proving our approach. I assembled a team of 4, not the flashiest consultants available, but the most collaborative. People who listened more than they talked, who built consensus rather than demanding agreement, who measured success by outcomes rather than applause. The engagement went well. better than well. The client's launch exceeded projections by 23%, and the CEO sent Catherine a note calling our team the most effective consultants we've ever worked with. That note became our first piece of marketing. Word spread in the way industry word always spreads slowly at first, then all at once. A former colleague mentioned our work to a colleague. A board member at the biotech company recommended us to 2 other portfolio companies. The network effect that had worked against me at Whitfield began working for me at Calloway. Within 6 months, we had 8 clients. Within 9 months, we had 12. Our team grew from 4 to 15, and we maintained a waiting list for the first time in Callaway's history. And then Vantage called. The conversation came through Catherine first. "Your old client wants to talk," she said, barely suppressing a smile. Apparently their launch isn't going as planned. The Alara launched the drug I developed the strategy for. The project Brandon had taken credit for was struggling. Market share was below projections. The competitive response had been fiercer than expected, and the implementation team was scrambling to understand why. Because they didn't understand the strategy. They'd memorized it, but they hadn't built it. There's a difference. "What do they want?" I asked. "They want you. Specifically, the CEO remembers you from the original presentation, says you were the one who actually understood their business." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt something closer to sadness. 7 years of work, stolen and squandered, because the wrong person led the implementation, and now they were looking for the woman at the table to fix things. "Tell them I'll take a meeting," I said, "but I won't clean up their mess for free." The meeting happened at Vantage's headquarters. I brought Daniel and 2 senior consultants, a show of force, though I didn't think of it that way. At the time, I thought of it as demonstrating the team approach that had become our signature. The Vantage CEO greeted me at the elevator. "Michelle, thank you for coming." This time he knew my name. "Thank you for reaching out." I should have reached out sooner. I should have, he paused, choosing words carefully. I should have asked more questions in that original meeting. We walked to a conference room where the commercial team was waiting. Familiar faces, stressed expressions, the particular exhaustion of people watching their work fail in slow motion. "Tell me what's happening," I said. For the next 2 hours, they walked me through the problems. Market share erosion, pricing pressure, competitive responses they hadn't anticipated. All of it predictable if you understood the market, surprising only if you'd memorized a presentation. When they finished, the CEO turned to me. "Can you help?" "I can, but I need you to understand something first." I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "The strategy you're struggling with, I developed it. Every analysis, every recommendation, every market assumption, it was my work presented by someone else." Silence. Uncomfortable, necessary silence. "That's not why I'm telling you this," I continued. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand what went wrong. You didn't just lose a consultant when I left Whitfield. You lost the person who understood your business at a level no presentation can capture." The CEO nodded slowly. "We made a mistake." "You made several, but that's not the point either. The point is this: if you work with me now, you're working with a team. A team that values knowledge and the work that delivers results. Not a star, not a performer, not someone who takes credit for other people's ideas. I need to be sure you finally understand the difference between the two." "Yes, Michelle, we understand now. What will this mistake cost us?" I named a number. Higher than Whitfield's rates, higher than any competitor in the market. And one more condition, I added. "What's that?" "I want Gerald Hoffman to know you hired me." The CEO almost smiled. "That can be arranged." I would never have asked for something like this before. But as I said, the transformation was happening. The news reached Whitfield within a week. Not through any formal announcement, just the industry network doing what it does. Whispers, rumors, eventually confirmation. Gerald called me directly. I let it go to voicemail. His message was brief. "Michelle, I hear you're working with Vantage again. I'd like to discuss what that means for the relationship going forward. Call me back." I didn't call back. I didn't need to. Because the relationship was already changing. 2 more Whitfield clients reached out in the following month. Then 3 more. They weren't coming because of some aggressive sales pitch. We didn't do aggressive sales pitches. They were coming because the work spoke for itself. Quietly, competently, and devastatingly effectively. The transformation wasn't just about building a practice anymore. It was about proving something larger. Leadership doesn't require volume. Excellence doesn't require performance, and sometimes the quietest voice in the room belongs to the person who understands the most. The confrontation I'd spent a year avoiding came unexpectedly at an industry conference in Manhattan. The Pharmaceutical Consulting Summit happens every October, 3 days of networking and panels. I'd attended for years as a Whitfield representative, always in the background. This year was different. Catherine had insisted I participate in a panel on future trends in pharmaceutical strategy. The panel was scheduled for the second afternoon, 4 speakers, audience of about 200 people. What wasn't standard was who else was on the panel. Gerald Hoffman. I saw his name on the program the morning of the event. For a moment, I considered backing out. The old Michelle, the one who avoided confrontation, who stayed quiet, who let others take credit, she would have found an excuse. But I wasn't her anymore. The panel convened at 2 o'clock. Gerald was already seated when I arrived, and his expression when he saw me was something I'll never forget. Not anger, exactly. More like the confusion of someone who'd underestimated an opponent and was just beginning to understand the cost. "Michelle," he said, nodding curtly. "Gerald." The moderator introduced us. Gerald's credentials went on for 2 minutes: founder of Whitfield Partners, 3 decades of industry experience, thought leader, pioneer. Mine were simpler. Practice director at Calloway Associates, builder of their pharmaceutical division, 7 years of prior experience. The audience didn't know the story behind those 7 years. But Gerald did. The questions started generically. Then the moderator turned to something more interesting. "There's been significant movement in the pharmaceutical consulting space over the past year," she said. "Calloway in particular has grown rapidly. Michelle, can you speak to what's driving that success?" I felt Gerald's attention sharpen beside me. "The short answer is team structure," I said. "Most consulting firms operate on an individual expertise model. Clients hire specific consultants for their specific knowledge. That works, but it creates dependency. What we've built at Calloway is a collaborative model where knowledge is shared, documented, and transferable. Clients don't lose momentum when a consultant moves to another project." "That sounds like a criticism of traditional models," the moderator said. "Gerald, would you like to respond?" I wish the moderator hadn't said that last sentence. I could predict what was coming, but you know how it is when you need to transform, life keeps coming at you. Gerald smiled. The practiced, confident smile I'd seen in 1,000 meetings. Individual expertise is what clients pay for. They want the best minds on their problems, not a committee. "With respect," I said, keeping my voice even, "clients pay for results. How you structure the team is a means to that end, not the point itself. And your results have been impressive," the moderator added. "Several major clients have moved to Calloway from other firms, including, I believe, some former Whitfield accounts." The question hung in the air. Gerald's smile tightened. "I can't speak to why clients make the choices they make," I said. "I can only speak to what we offer them." "What you offer," Gerald interrupted, "is a discount model. Lower rates, less experienced consultants, quantity over quality." I turned to face him directly. "Our rates are actually 15% higher than industry average. Our consultants are experienced professionals who chose collaboration over politics. And our quality speaks for itself, which is why clients keep coming back." Silence. The audience leaned forward, sensing something more personal beneath the professional disagreement. "I think what we're really discussing," Gerald said, his voice cooling, "is different philosophies of leadership. Some people believe leadership is about charisma, about presence, about commanding attention. Others apparently believe it's about hiding behind process." There it was. The same criticism he'd been making for 7 years, now delivered to 200 strangers. I could have deflected. I could have pivoted to safer ground. Instead, I leaned into the microphone. "Leadership isn't about attention," I said. "It's about enabling others to succeed. It's about building systems that work even when you're not in the room. It's about recognizing that your voice doesn't have to be the loudest to be the most valuable. I paused, letting the words settle. Some people confuse confidence with competence. They confuse volume with value. They look at someone who listens more than they talk and assume that person has nothing to say. I glanced at Gerald. They're usually wrong. First, there was a sharp silence. Then, to my complete surprise, applause started from the middle of the room and spread outward. Not exaggerated or thunderous, this was a professional audience, but real and affirming. Gerald's face had gone still. Not angry. Worse. Understanding. The panel continued for another 30 minutes, but the dynamic had shifted. Gerald spoke less, hedged more. I answered questions with the quiet authority of someone who had nothing left to prove. When it ended, I didn't shake his hand. I didn't need to. It would have been too fake. 3 people approached me in the hallway afterward. 2 were clients I'd never met, pharmaceutical executives who'd heard about Calloway and wanted to learn more. The third was a young woman, maybe 25, who waited until the others had left. "I just wanted to say thank you," she said. "I'm in consulting at a different firm, and I've always been told I'm too quiet and not suited for leadership. What you said in there about different kinds of leadership, that was exactly what I needed to hear." Standing there, I thought about the Michelle who'd sat at the end of that conference table, watching her work be stolen, too defeated to speak. "The people who tell you you're too quiet," I said, "are usually just afraid of what happens when you find your voice." She nodded, eyes bright. "How did you find yours?" I stopped trying to sound like them. I started sounding like me. It wasn't some grand, life-saving advice, of course. The challenges she would face wouldn't change. But my goal wasn't to say fancy words, and this was the only advice I could give. That conference was 18 months ago. Today, Callaway's pharmaceutical practice is the largest in the industry. We've grown from 4 consultants to 42. Our client list includes 7 of the top 10 pharmaceutical companies, and our retention rate is 94%. The team I built has won 3 industry awards for excellence in strategic consulting. Gerald Hoffman retired last spring. Whitfield's pharmaceutical revenue had declined by 40% since I left. 3 of their senior partners followed me to Callaway. The practice he'd built partly on my work, partly on my silence, couldn't survive without either. I made partner at Callaway 6 months ahead of schedule. Catherine presented the announcement at an all-hands meeting, and I accepted with a short speech that focused on the team rather than myself. Daniel Reyes, that junior analyst who spoke up in an empty conference room, is now a senior consultant leading his own client relationships. Some habits are worth keeping. Some people are worth investing in. The lesson I carry from this experience is this: transformation begins when you stop trying to fit someone else's definition of success. Excellence has many forms. Find yours. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. The full green file playlist waiting, or discover other color files for more office revenge. See you in the next file.